So there's a lot of things out there that you should know before going to law school, but I'm going to break down what I think are the 5 most important tips in order to crush your 1L year and beyond. Number 1 tip, and I'm not kidding, you should learn how to type using the ASDF JKL apostrophe, whatever. I'm looking at the keyboard, but learn to type using all 4 fingers, because when you're taking law school exams, many exams are not word limited. And because they're not word limited, and many professors will also allow you to say things that are incorrect, and they won't ding you on points, but they'll give you points if you get something right, it's basically a race to see who can type the most. So for example, I wrote on average 8,000 to 10,000 words per essay. It was like, not per essay, but per exam. It was like a 3-hour exam. I had many colleagues who only wrote a couple thousand words. And just statistically, if I had more content that would get me points per 1,000 words, I was going to get a better score simply because I wrote more. You don't want to be limited because you literally cannot type quickly enough. So most schools now do exams on the computer, and my first piece of advice is relearn to type. That's what I did, and it was very, very helpful. Number 2, outline as early as you can. When you go to law school, you're going to hear of this magical term called outlining. And all outlining really is taking your notes about the cases you've read and consolidating them into a shorter version that you can actually use to study for exams. The earlier you get started on outlining, the better, because the earlier you get started on the outline, the earlier you can memorize the outline. And that's number 3. Julian, did you just say memorize the outline? Yes, I did, fellow community members. Say memorize the outline. Most law students, I would garner 99%, do not do this. And take this with a grain of salt, but this is what I did, my 1L year at least. Once you finish writing your outline, memorize it front to back. Memorize the case name with the holding. Memorize the reasoning. Memorize every little note that you jotted down, because when you're on the exam and when it's exam day, the faster you can recollect that knowledge, regurgitate it, spit it out on the exam, come up with these arguments, the more you're going to be able to write and the more points you are likely going to get. It's certainly not necessary to memorize your outline. Don't take this video as the word of God or anything like that, but that would be my 3rd tip, memorize your outline. So if I were to go back in time and look at my pre-1L summer self, right before I was going to law school, I'm super anxious, I'm just ready to get my hands dirty, but I can't do the work yet because I'm not in law school yet. This is what I would do differently, and this is number 4. I would read some of the legal cases that are going to be assigned to you. You can't always predict it, but there are like traditional cases in contract law, property, etc., that I think you can look into, and you can buy the case books. And just familiarize yourself with how it feels to read these cases, because they're dense, they're thick, they're different. You have opinions, then you have dissents, then you have concurrences, and there's just a basic level of familiarity that I think if you take just a couple hours to read some of these cases before going to law school, it'll help prime your brain for what's to come. Because when you go to law school, you're going to hit the ground running. And you're going to have 30 to 40 pages of reading per class, 2 classes a week for each course. You have 4 courses. It's a lot of reading. And the more familiar you are with the type of reading that you're getting yourself into, the more prepared you are going to be. So it doesn't hurt to expose yourself a little bit just to that type of reading and that type of comprehension. Lastly, and most importantly, come up with a mental health strategy for law school. Law school is a lot of pressure. Law school is a lot of rigor. Law school is a lot of reading. Law school is a lot of work. Coming up with a strategy, even if it's something as small as I'm going to take 5 minutes a week to do deep breathing, or when I feel overwhelmed, I'm going to go for a run. Building up an arsenal of tools at your disposal that you can leverage later on in your law school career, especially your 1L year, to turn to when things get rough is very important. This is something that I didn't do well, but I can give you one data point that's maybe insightful here. My first semester at NYU, I essentially worked every single day. I took half of a day off around Thanksgiving. Otherwise, I went straight through and I worked very hard, 12 to 15 hours a day probably. And I did fairly well. I had all A's and 1 A- on my grades. Okay, fast forward to second semester, and I bought an Xbox at the time. It was Xbox One. And now I had this distraction, which for me was actually very good for my mental health. I would play a lot of Star Wars Battlefront at the time, whatever. Point being, I had a better balance my second semester of mental health with studying and working. You end the semester, I had all A's, 1 A-, and an A+. So I had 1 point better on my GPA my second semester compared to my first. Now, was second semester maybe a little bit easier because people in 1L just kind of didn't really care anymore and weren't trying as hard? Maybe, I'm not sure, but I can tell you this much, I was just as happy. Sorry, I was much happier. I'm just as happy. I was extremely happier my second semester, and I performed better. So I think it's important to remind yourself before you go in that you need to have a plan on how you're going to take care of yourself, how you're going to support yourself, and who in your network can you look to when you need support, because law school is a lot of work and it's a lot of pressure. And if you go into it blindly with the mantra of I'm just going to work through it, you will burn out, you will struggle, you might drop out, things will not go well. And I have a lot of friends that have ended up going down that path, and it's not pretty. So come up with a plan in advance and think about what are the various things I can leverage, how can I be creative in using my network and the tools at my disposal to just boost my fulfillment in life, even though I know that it's going to be a lot of work. Of course, there are many more tips in law school besides the 5 that I just mentioned. Doing all the readings twice, reading things in advance, going to extracurricular events, meeting people, learning how to use Westlaw. The list could go on, but I think for this video, those are the 5 things that I would really focus on, because that's going to give you a fundamental strong base that will let you crush law school wherever you go. That's it for me, guys. Thank you as always. Leave me a subscribe, follow, like, whatever you feel like. And let me know what you want to see more of in the comments. Much love, guys.